Hey everyone, and welcome to this month's live event with National Sewing Circle. We once again have Nicki back to answer all of your sewing questions. So thanks for being here, Nicki.
I am so glad to be here.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. So while if this is your first time tuning in and you're watching for the first time, over the next hour, you can ask Nicki any of your sewing or sewing related questions. Go ahead and type those into the chat box. We have a few questions that have already come in, but I do want to say we have a couple things we want to draw your attention to, and that is a free download, which is 7 tips for organizing your sewing room. So we thought that was a good way to start off, whether it is something you have been putting off for a while, or maybe you're thinking about getting into spring cleaning or things like that. How is it that you organize or clean or keep your sewing space tidy, Nicki?
So I do my best. I know we were just talking about this before we went live. We do our best. But there are some things that I do that I feel really help me keep things organized and help me be able to see everything and know where everything is. So
Yeah.
The patterns, keeping track of your patterns, keeping those organized is a challenge. But for me, because I trace off so many patterns onto other paper, I've got pattern envelopes of commercial patterns that I keep in a little tote, but then I have the ones that I've traced off and altered and all that stuff. And when I'm done with those, I roll them up into a little tube and I stick them straight up and down in a tote. So I've got so they're not stacked, because if they were stacked flat, they would get flattened. So
Right.
I stack them like upright, like posters kind of,
Mhm.
and they just all sit sticking upright, and I write on the side of the roll what it is.
Mhm.
So that helps me keep them in the same place and to not get squished.
Yes.
I've also heard the tip of people taking their pattern envelopes and putting it into like a Ziploc bag
Mhm.
and punching a hole in the top of the Ziploc bag and threading it through a hanger so
Yeah.
that they can hang that pattern envelope and any of the other stuff that kind of goes along with that pattern, keeping it in a Ziploc bag. So that's helpful if you have closet space. But
Yeah.
the other thing that I like to do, because I have my fabric stash is ridiculous. I've got like 3 totes of fabric and also a bag or two, just kind of like shoved. But for my totes, and I learned this trick from Marie Kondo, who's the organizing and tidying up lady, is to fold your fabric and to stack it instead of like stacking it one on top of the other. You do it kind of like files in like a filing cabinet. So
Mhm.
you it and you put it on its side so that you can see a little bit of the pattern and you see what it is. So you can kind of see all of the fabrics that you have instead of just seeing the 3 or 4 that's on top
Yeah.
and slide it in. So I have like 2 layers in each of my big totes. The bottom layer all stacked in, and then another layer all stacked in. So it kind of helps me to be able to see everything that I've got without having to pull everything out
Right.
every time I want to get to the stuff that's on the bottom. So that was a super helpful tip for me. I do it in my dresser drawers too for my clothes. It just helps
Perfect.
me to see stuff. So
See, I am not that organized in either place. I'm more of like, I know I have it somewhere and then I just have to go find it. But along the way, I find things that I'm like, oh, I forgot about that. And it's like, brand new stuff. Yeah. Perfect. All right. Virginia asks, do you prefer to use a serger or a sewing machine stitch for finishing seams on knit fabric, or does the weight of the knit fabric make a difference?
So, for talking about knit fabric specifically, you don't actually need to finish the edges of the seams because knit fabric isn't going to ravel. So, you really don't need to finish those off. Like on the inside of a knit shirt, you don't need to like zigzag stitch the edges of that knit because it won't ravel.
Hmm.
But for other fabrics, when you do want to finish the edges to prevent fraying, and keep your seams nice and sturdy, and prevent having a mess on the inside of your garments when things fray, I prefer using my sewing machine. I have a serger. It's in the closet. I don't take it out that often. So I just prefer to use my sewing machine for everything. So to finish seam allowances on my sewing machine, I will typically just use a zigzag stitch. Just
Hmm.
get kind of close-ish to the edge of the fabric. Just throw a zigzag stitch in. You can also do what's called stitch in pink, which is super easy. You just throw a line of straight stitches into those seam allowances independently. So you'll have 2 seam allowances on each seam. You can do them independently, you can do them together as well, but I like to do them independently a lot because I like to have my seams pressed open, kind of personal preference and case by case basis. But to stitch in pink, you would stitch a line of straight stitches, close enough to the edge, but not too close, because then you take your pinking shears and you pink the edge, and pinking will help prevent fraying, and then that line of straight stitches also locks that in so that you will definitely not get any fraying. So there are a bunch of other ways to finish your seam allowances if you want to get fancy, but those to me are the most straightforward and easiest, and that I use 95% of the time.
I think you are the person I've seen use pinking shears more than anyone else. Like, I had a pair once and I never ever used them, so I gave them to my mom. I don't know that I've ever used pinking shears. So maybe I'll get a pair sometime and like use them for decoration somewhere. I don't know.
They are so helpful. Let me just share a quick tip on pinking
Yeah.
shears too, because in making masks, I've made 100 plus masks, and I do the kind that have the curved seam here and they kind of
Yeah.
go up, so they've got curves. So when you're sewing curves and then turning it right side out, you need to either clip or notch depending on if the curve is convex or concave.
Mm-hmm.
And in all of those cases, I just use my pinking shears. I don't bother clipping or notching. I just take my pinking shears to trim those seam allowances, and that releases the seam allowance and reduces the bulk, and just one stop completely cuts out some work for me. So I think they're great. You definitely do not require them. They're not a required tool, but I like mine.
Perfect. All right. Our next one here. Someone asks, I have a Singer traditional 2277. I don't understand why thread is cut off when I try to sew. So I'm not sure if I'm not familiar with that exact brand and model. I don't know if you are either, but just in general, if that's happening on any machine.
I am not familiar with that model, but that particular problem. So sometimes when you go to sew, if you don't have enough of a thread tail through your needle, sometimes when you go to sew, the thread will just the mechanism of the take up lever will pull the thread out of the eye of the needle, so it kind of pulls it out. So you have to have a longish thread tail to start. Otherwise, I'm not sure why thread would be actually getting cut off before you sew. So I'm not sure about that one.
Yeah. No, same thing. I was going to say the thread tail thing too. So we're on the same page there. All right. Our next question here, we have kind of a 2-part question, multiple part question from Anne. So the first one is she wants tips on sewing felt type cloth. She's saying that she was thinking about doing some felt letters, maybe games with felt, things for preschool classrooms. And so what would you recommend, either hand or by machine, or just in general, some felt sewing tips?
Yeah, felt is great for that kind of thing, little toys for kids. I've got a whole stack of felt upstairs, and yeah, my daughter's got a bunch of felt toys too. So sewing felt is great. It is, it's not a fabric that's like a typical fabric that's either woven or knit. It's like a pressed fabric. So it acts a little bit differently, but it is fairly stable to sew. So it's a fairly easy thing to sew. It will dull your needle fairly quickly, or quicker than sewing on a quilting cotton. So after 4 or 5 hours of sewing, if you're sewing straight up on felt, you might want to just keep that in the back of your mind, pay attention to the signs of a dull needle. Felt, you don't need to finish the edges because it will not ravel, will not fray, because it's not a woven fabric. So that's great. You can just put things together and stitch them and just kind of leave the seam allowances on the outside. And a lot of little kid toys like that are done like that. I made my daughter a fire, like a pretend campfire. So we had 3 different sides of flame that we stitched together. And that's that's what I did, is just putting them together, and you just stitch, leave opening for stuffing, and you don't have to turn anything right side out. So doing it by machine is super easy. You can just use a straight stitch. I would use like an all-purpose thread. I think would work just fine with felt, or even, I don't see why 100% cotton wouldn't work just fine as well. It's just a toy. If it's going to get a lot of play and wear and like pulled and stretched, I would say maybe stay away from 100% cotton and just do your all-purpose or polyester thread. So yeah, it's pretty easy to work with, and great for kids' toys. There's a million different colors and a lot of fun projects you can do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a lot of great videos on National Sewing Circle on kids' toys. I've done one where we made a little puzzle, like you applique a shape onto it and then you cut it into however many pieces you want. And then it's a little puzzle. So we have all sorts of felt videos working with felt, both by machine and by hand. And we even have a class on that too. So a bunch of resources there. So then the second part from Anne, she would like to learn how to sew with her new singer. She says she hates it when the bobbin gets stuck and she doesn't know how to fix it. So issues with bobbins and how do you fix them?
So yeah, bobbins, you can run into some problems with bobbins. I think the number one culprit is simply threading mistakes, which happens way more frequently than you might think. You might think, oh no, I've been sewing for 20 years. I'm not going to thread it wrong, but I am guilty of that as well. And I have to like check back in, because, if you're threading, you've threaded it 800 million times in your life. It becomes kind of by rote and you're not really paying attention to what you're doing. And that's when something will slip out or whatever. So you just kind of have to pay attention to what you're doing. Make sure, the thread of the bobbin is going in the correct direction, either if you put it into the bobbin case or if you're just dropping it in to your machine. If bobbin thread is getting stuck, it could be a threading issue. It could be a bobbin size issue. If it's a new machine, this is probably not what it is, but I need to say it. If you're using the wrong size of bobbin in your machine, it is not going to work. Bobbins will come in different heights, and your machine manual will tell you what height of bobbin is correct for your machine. But if you have a couple different machines in your house, bobbins are probably floating around and it could get switched around. But there was one time I tried to put a wrong size bobbin in my machine and I was getting the worst thread nests, and it was, the timing was just off with the needle coming down and the bobbin thread wrapping around. There's something, the thread was, I don't know what was going on in there, but it was not working. It was giving me terrible thread nests. So just double check that, make sure that you're using the right size bobbin. If you have, let's see, it's always possible that it's a tension issue. I don't know that it doesn't sound like a tension issue. But you can play around with the tension and see if that will alleviate the issue. So yeah, there are a couple things that you can try. And yeah, just go back to your manual and make sure you're hitting all the right spots in threading.
Mine always, the thing that gets me stuck is like, when you get to start winding your bobbin, you wind that first couple little wraps by hand. And if it doesn't completely cover that little thread tail, and sometimes you have that little bit sticking out, which you might not see it when it's fully wound bobbin, but after you sew and you're about halfway down, it can start catching on that. So you can always take your bobbin back out and like trim that annoying little thread that's right there. And that can be it too. And the other thing I was going to ask is, I know you use them. I've never used them, but you occasionally will use a metal bobbin, right? So, and I know
Yes.
we've talked about this before where certain machines, just some things just don't work. I've never had success with a metal bobbin in any machine. I've only ever used plastic ones. So,
That's funny
yeah,
because I use like almost exclusively metal
I
bobbins.
know. Yeah,
And yeah, I don't know why but I've had brother machines and I've had this FOF, and I think I was able to use metal bobbins on both of those. But I know machines a lot of times will come just with plastic bobbins
yeah,
nowadays.
yeah,
And I bought, I don't know how I got all these metal bobbins, but they're the same height as my plastic ones. So they are able to work for me. But yes, some machines can just, I don't know, be a little bit finicky
yeah,
in the mechanisms down there by the bobbin. So yeah, just trying some different things like that might
yeah.
well.
Absolutely. All right, our next one here, Ronnie asks, my son has a leather jacket. The zipper mechanism fell off completely. My machine cannot handle leather, so replacing the zipper is pretty much out unless I can find somebody with a heavy duty machine. So can that mechanism be replaced? And if so, where can I get it? And do we have a video tutorial to teach me? It's a plastic zipper.
So like the zipper head, like
That's,
completely
yeah,
come off.
that's what I'm thinking.
I know that there are ways because
Yeah.
I've seen just like scrolling on Pinterest, I've seen, those sewing hacks. People will
Mhm.
like some combination of like a plastic straw to like cut off and make a new little thing. I don't know
Okay.
how
I've
personally I
never seen the crazy little hack ones like that, but I mean, even just at my local Joann fabric store over in the zipper section, and they even have them at Hobby Lobby because I was just there the other day. And they have a little kit for replacing the zipper. I don't want to say pull because it's more than just the pull, it's
yeah.
the whole thing, but there actually is a little tool it comes with and everything so you can replace that. So those ones that I saw were for a metal zipper, but I would assume that you could probably use it for plastic as well. So they do make something
Hmm.
specifically for it. We don't have a tutorial on that right now. I think we should add that. But yeah, they definitely make that handy
Yes.
little tool.
Yeah. So yeah, it definitely is possible.
Yeah, for sure. Although I want to see you do it with a straw now or something.
I'm gonna have to go look up that hack again because it
Yes.
was really
Yeah.
cool.
Okay. All right. Ella asks, I'm not a great sewer, but want to be better. What type of projects should I start with until I get better skills?
Um, so some projects that you can use to help build your skills, I would stick with just like quilting cotton fabric because it is stable. You can, use your marking pen and just like mark on it. It takes marks really well, makes it really nice for cutting straight lines and stuff. Um, my mom calling me.
How embarrassing. No, I'm just kidding.
Mom. um, Sorry, Ella. I was saying, quilting cotton fabric is great because, yes, great for straight lines. And then um, once you graduate from projects with straight lines like tote bags and pillowcases and, rectangular scarves and things like that, then you can start doing your different stitches and stuff, and then graduate up to other fabrics. But quilting cotton is a great place to start because of all the reasons I said, and it's also great for many different projects. It can be used to make sturdy bags. It can be used to make comfortable scarves or a comfortable, like, boxy type shirt. So simple garments like that, simple skirts, just a nice A-line skirt with some darts is a fairly simple place to start, or just like simple rectangles and a elastic band at the top. That boom, you've got a skirt.
Mhm.
And quilting cotton comes in a million cute prints, so that makes projects just so much more fun when you've got cute, fun fabric, of
Yeah.
course.
Yep.
But the the rectangular tote bag and the pillowcase is just a great place to start um, because you have something that you can use and it's a great confidence booster, and you can then start doing more challenging things as you grow in your skills. But there's a ton of course, tip videos on nationalsewingcircle.com, a bunch of little projects that you can use to help. And videos are great because with a lot of things in sewing, it's hard to kind of describe with words. So using videos, especially if you're a visual learner, is super, super helpful. So you can really see what's going on in there. So
Yeah.
that it's a great resource.
Absolutely. And I love the pillowcase project too, because like you said, it's basic shapes, it's, easy fabric, but then you can make one very, very basic. And then the next one, maybe you practice seam finishes on the inside that are differently. Maybe you practice a French seam, maybe you practice different hems, or you bind the edge, or you add embellishments, decorative stitches.
Yeah.
So you could make literally a million different, maybe not a million, a bunch of different pillowcases, and they'll all be a little different, and you can practice a new and different skill each time. So I love
Exactly.
it. I've never made a pillowcase, but that's what I would do if I did. All right, this next one here is more of a comment than a question, but something that I can 100% relate to. And Dawn says that sometimes after my sewing project is done, it looks like a tornado hit my space. So I think that's something a lot of us relate to as well. So I guess me personally, I have to clean. It's a weird thing. I have to clean up after one project before I can start the next one. Do you do something similar or along those lines?
Yes, I do, because I can't think straight if I've got all this stuff out from my previous project, and then like my scissors and my pin cushion is way over there, and then if I'm trying to start another project, I'm like, where's all my stuff? It gets
Yeah.
like scattered around. But yeah, when I'm doing a project, I don't have a great space either. I don't have like a cutting table or anything. So a lot of times I'm doing things on the floor. Ugh, one of these days I'm gonna get a better space, but so all this stuff is like scattered across my floor, and I'm like crawling around on the floor, like, where did I put that? Oh, yeah, I'm sitting on it. And
Yep.
so, yeah, it's like everything gets taken out and is on the floor. So, yeah, before I can even have room to lay out my next piece of fabric, everything has to go back into its own space. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I relate
I
to
agree.
that hard.
Mhm. Yes. Coincidentally, that does mean that my sewing room is the most often cleaned room in my house, though. Because
That's, that's
all
good.
right, our next one here, Carrie asks, I've made a few garments, curtains, small projects, and my machine needs replacing. Do you have an easy to use machine that someone can grow their skill set on?
Yeah, I can make a couple recommendations, but before I do, machines are kind of specific to where you want to grow your skills. For
Mm-hmm.
one, quilters will have different things that they're looking for in their machines than garment sewers. Um, but for like a general all-purpose sewer, I had great success on my brother machine. That was the first one that I had though when I was very first starting to actually get good at sewing. Um, and I graduated then to like the next step up of brother machine. So I had the brother CS 1000i or something like that. It was like the $70 or $80 machine. So it was a very, very little money invested into it, which was great. I was a college student and I didn't know like what I was doing yet. But then I graduated up to the next level up of brother, which just had a bunch more decorative stitches, and it was a little bit heavier duty, while still being like under $100. So also, not a ton invested into it, and that was a great place for me to start because it had everything I needed. I was a garment sewer, so it had. I mean, if you have a straight stitch, a zigzag stitch, and a couple buttonhole stitches, really you're good to go. Um, but it had a bunch more other cool stuff too. So it was great for me. It was easy for me to take to and from places, because it was light. Um, so that was a good place to start. I will also take a minute to talk about this FOF though, because this FOF is fantastic. For like a general all-purpose sewing, it's amazing. And also I'm a garment sewer and it's amazing for garment sewers as well. The thing that I love about the FOF is it's got the integrated dual feed foot, which is this little black thing on the back. probably can't see it from this distance, but the little black thing on the back that you pull down and hook under the foot, under the presser foot, and it acts as a walking foot. So it's great. I kind of always have it engaged. You can't have it engaged when you have other feet on it, like a zipper foot. You can't have it engaged. It's just your general foot. But when I'm sewing knits, I've always got it engaged. If you're sewing multiple layers, I've always got it engaged because it helps feed the top layer of fabric at the same rate as the bottom layer. So it just helps keep your layers together. And it is just super helpful. And the machine this is the Passport 2.0, and that runs, last I checked, it was like maybe $700. So it is definitely more of an investment. And I don't think that I wouldn't have purchased this as my first machine, just because of, everything that's going on in your life and you don't know what you're doing, where you're going. But it was a great machine to upgrade to. And I don't think I ever want another machine other than this, because some people do like to have the more technology built in, their touchscreen with the smart features that tells you everything and does everything for you. I like mine to be a little bit more manual. So I've got my keypad of buttons here to tell me which stitch I need to type in, tension up here, and then some other stitch settings here. And I like getting my hands on it and knowing exactly what I'm pushing and what I'm doing, so that if it doesn't work, I can say, okay, I pushed that. I need to, walk that back and take a step back from there. So I kind of know everything that's going on. That's how I like to, that's what makes sense to me. But that's my 2 cents. I also really recommend people go in and test drive machines if they possibly can. I know that's so much harder now. I don't know if machine dealers are open, if they're letting people come in. They might be doing it by appointment, as a lot of things are now. But it is so helpful to sit down at a machine and sew on it and feel it, rather than just reading reviews online and kind of ordering it sight unseen, which is how I have ordered machines in the past. It's really hard, and reading reviews is really the best way to get a feel for what the machine is, what it does, how it works, how happy people have been with it. But as always, as is the case with buying fabric too, it's always better to get your hands on it and see how it feels to you. So
Yeah.
Long answer. Hopefully I answered the question.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. And she had an add-on about what are some features you should look for. So I think you covered that in the beginning too. With it depends on what it is you're wanting in your machine, because you and I are a little different on what we want machines. Mine is 100% all fancy. Like the touchscreen is bigger than my computer, and it automatically senses, when you have different layers, and it adjusts everything for me. And I'm okay with it being smarter than me. Like I'm good at that. And it's one of those, if I don't know something, it has a little question mark, a search, you type it into the machine itself, and it just does it. So
that's nice. They can be little computers.
Yes. Yeah. It's not little, but yes. All right. Sonia asks, can you do a whip stitch on a sewing machine?
Kind of. So the whip stitch is the stitch that goes around the edge of the fabric, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure. I don't do a lot of hand sewing, but from what I recall, that is the whip stitch. So you're going around, kind of encircling the raw edge. So that's a great stitch for kind of keeping raw edges from raveling and keeping things together. So it not exactly a whip stitch, simply because on a sewing machine, you've got the 2 threads that are meeting, but the zigzag stitch can kind of do that that function, because if you're zigzag stitching off the raw edge, you have your stitch, in the fabric, and then the right needle swing will swing off of the fabric, and then it'll come back. So you have that bite in the fabric, and then it goes off and kind of wraps around. But you do have the needle thread and the bobbin thread that are then meeting at the outside edge of the fabric. So there are some other kind of overlocking stitches that work kind of the same way. Let's see, you got your zigzag stitch. I don't know what they're called, but my machine has little diagrams of what the stitches look like, and you can see that the stitch is going to have a right needle swing that, depending on where you position it, can kind of go off the edge of the fabric and encase that edge kind of like a whip stitch would.
Mm-hmm. Yep, mine, same thing. It has a whole, it's called overcast stitch category. So they're just, different variations of that. So perfect. All right, Vaughn asks, I've been asked to sew adhesive-backed Velcro to a grill cover. What thread and needle should I use?
So for sewing Velcro, I like to use a thread that is kind of lighter weight and finer. Essentially, don't use like a 100% cotton because it is very lofty, and to sew through the the barbs of the Velcro, that thread can just kind of get stuck in there, and the stitch might not lay well or form well over the loft of those barbs. It can get gummed up or stuck in there because the 100% cotton thread is very lofty. It's got a lot of fuzz around it, kind of. So all-purpose thread will have less of that. If you have a finer thread, rayon thread perhaps, it's just kind of twisted tighter and it is less hairy. But all-purpose thread or polyester thread would also be fine. I just have not had great success with 100% cotton thread in conjunction with Velcro. Because it is adhesive backed, sometimes I've been able to sew through adhesive backed things and it has not been an issue. Sometimes I think it depends on, the quality of the Velcro you got, the age of it. As it gets older, I think the adhesive is more likely to gum up your needle. But just pay attention for that, because if your needle gets that adhesive kind of gummed up on it, it will mess with your tension. It will give you probably thread nests, maybe some thread breakage. It can cause all kinds of problems, but you can just have rubbing alcohol on a little cotton ball, and without even breaking the stitch or without taking the thread out, you can just kind of clean off that needle and carry on. And you might need to do that every couple of inches or every couple of stitches if it's really bad. But that rubbing alcohol takes that gunk off your needle super easy.
Yeah.
Thread for needle, that kind of depends on because Velcro can come in also like different thicknesses and weights, kind of. But honestly, like a size 80/12 all-purpose needle would probably be fine. If you find that it is punching holes that are too big, because sometimes that grill cover material can be kind of flimsy and lightweight. Maybe that's just the cheap grill covers that I buy. I don't know. But if you're punching too big of holes in that material, you can go down to a thinner needle, 60/9. But the smaller numbers needs a thinner needle.
Yep.
And that will make smaller holes in the fabric.
Yeah. So I have to say, my follow-up question to this is that because the only time I have ever tried to sew through adhesive backed, it didn't work. I mean, it just was just more hassle than it was worth. And so if you were going to do this project and you have an adhesive back, which means technically no sew, versus would you just go and get different Velcro that didn't have adhesive and then just sew it down because it's going to be easier?
So the no sew aspect of Velcro, I do not trust I don't trust it. I would not trust it to stay stuck when I go to like tear that Velcro off, tear the grill
Mhm.
cover off, or whatever you're Velcroing. Um, and I think that there are ways to make it work with sewing over adhesive. But if it just wasn't working, I would probably go try and find a Velcro that was not adhesive backed, because it would be easier to sew through. And yeah, the adhesive backing can kind of be nice for placement, so you don't have to
Mhm.
like pin or clip something. But if the drawbacks are that you just can't sew through it, then it's not worth it. And I would find a different way to either pin it down or use double-sided sticky tape if that would work better with the needle, or that temporary spray adhesive,
Mhm.
glue stick, something of
Yeah.
that nature to help place that Velcro, that would not have all the drawbacks of potentially gumming up your needle like some of those adhesive backings can do.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Sue says, thank you for all the useful tips. Can you give me some advice on sewing with shearing elastic for a smocking effect?
So, so sewing with elastic for a smocking effect. So what I'm thinking is elastic thread.
Yeah.
Um, so your elastic thread is um, is wound onto your bobbin, and you are sewing straight stitches, and and um, and then that elastic, when it relaxes, it will gather the fabric. And with elastic thread, you want to stitch multiple rows, because if you stitch just one row, it doesn't really gather up all that much. The elastic thread isn't a very strong elastic, it just one line of it. But when you get 5 or more rows of it, it starts to create that shearing effect, like Sue is talking about. And it's a really pretty kind of smocking. You see it a lot of times on the bodices of girls' dresses, because it gathers that fabric in really nicely, and then you have the fullness at the bottom for a skirt. So I think I did a video on this on nationalsewingcircle.com, showing you how to wind the elastic onto your bobbin. And it can be different. Some machines will want you to wind the elastic thread on the bobbin using the actual like bobbin winder like on your machine, and some will tell you they want you to do it by hand so that it doesn't get too tight on the bobbin.
Mm-hmm.
What has worked for me in my machine is winding it by hand, putting a little bit of tension on that elastic thread, so stretching it a little bit as it is, as you're winding it on the bobbin.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then you use just a straight stitch. You bump the stitch length up, um, and yeah, and the machine does the rest. You do want to tie those threads off at the beginning and end of your stitching lines. I don't like back stitching when I have elastic thread in the bobbin.
Yeah.
Just it can create kind of like a big bump. So I would bring the needle thread to the wrong side and tie it off. But yeah, you don't want to stretch the fabric if you're doing it on a knit fabric. You don't want to stretch the fabric as it's going under the machine, because you don't want to stretch it out of shape. The elastic thread is what is going to be doing the stretching and the snapping back to create your smocking effect. Um, After you've done as many rows of straight stitches as you want to get that smocking effect, to get whatever length, if you're doing a bodice, whatever however many you want to do, you can hit it with a shot of steam from your steam iron too, and that will help it kind of shrink up a little bit more. Lighter weight fabrics are better for this smocking effect. If you wanted to smock like a bottom weight or like a corduroy, it's not going to work because the fabric is too stiff and that elastic thread is just too weak to to pull it in.
Mm-hmm.
So the lighter the better, and the fewer amount of layers the better. So if you can avoid having, a double layer, a single layer is always better because it'll shear up, it'll gather up just that much better because it will
Yeah.
be more flexible. Um, yeah, those are the basics. Those are my tips for it. It's a really fun effect to do. Um, and
Yeah.
yeah, I made my daughter a dress doing that and she loved it. So yeah, it's fun.
It's perfect. I say I only have done it a couple times. This is back in the day when you and I were at Sonu's, and I did it just how many lines, and I tied them, hand tied every single row. And I remember as soon as we put it on the model for pictures, like you could just hear seams going pop pop, like it was just
Oh,
coming in dead. So like I guess the only thing I would now do in the future is like I'd have start on one side, and then I would try to like work my way down as a maze. So I really only have two spots that I have to tie, and the rest of those aren't, because that was just like it looked so good, and then you're like, it's just all coming undone. So if I don't know, it depends on the project. If you can like sew it both ways, getting it through your machine, but that
right.
would be the only thing I would say because that's such a bummer.
Yeah. And yeah, that's a really good tip because you can go one way and then just spin it and go the other
Yeah,
way. And
yeah,
yeah, I liked to align my next row with the edge of my presser foot. Depending on the presser foot you have, that made it about a 1/4 inch apart. And that was just a really good distance to get the right, I don't know, the right amount of
yeah.
gathering up. And yeah, it looks really nice.
Perfect. Also, if you like the look of smocking and you don't want to do it, they do make pre-smocked fabric at Joann's, and it's perfect for. They make it in, I'm gonna say little girl height and also adult height, so you could very easily do a skirt, a shirt, a dress, and not have to do most of the work. So that's awesome too.
Nice.
Yes. All right. Tawana wants to know: are metal bobbins available for all machines?
Um, I don't know 100%, but I think they should be because you can just see in your machine manual or by looking online what height of bobbin your machine takes, which I think is measured in millimeters. Um, and I imagine they make bobbins in every size and height you could want just because they make everything now these days, you
That's true.
know? So
Yeah.
I would say, yeah.
That's the only thing I'm going to say is maybe not, only because I have the Viking, and mine has the top and the bottom of the bobbin are not the same. Like the top is this big and the bottom is this big, right?
Oh,
So I know that even if it was this right height, I don't know. So like if you have a
diameter.
machine that like is a very specific, but I don't know, maybe Viking makes their own metal bobbins, right?
Right.
So that's just so that it probably does exist, but just make sure you're getting the right brand if you have like a weird oddity like that, that
Hmm. Yeah. That sometimes bobbins can be weird like that, or if it's a different diameter, like not even the top and bottom, but just like a different diameter than other
yeah.
machines would take. A lot of
Mhm.
times with products that are specific to um, specific like makes or models of
Yeah.
a machine, it'll tell you on the product page this is good for product or model number or whatever. So you
Yeah.
can look for that. You can also look in the reviews, do a
Yeah.
search in the reviews for your machine model number and see if other people have bought it for that machine and see if they say it works too.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we have another one. Olivia notes that to save money on fabric, she likes to upcycle pillowcases from thrift stores or other cotton apparel to practice with. So that's great. Going back to when we were talking about skill building projects,
Hmm.
great way to do that.
Yeah, and thrifting like sheets are great too to have fabric, like you say, just fabric to practice on.
Hmm.
Um, my grandma was great about that, about keeping things. She
Hmm.
would keep sheets, either had like a couple holes here and there, or
Hmm.
stains here and there. And now I have all that fabric, and you just cut away the part that is stained or holy, and you have all this other fabric to work with.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
it's
great.
perfect. All right, Deanna asks, I'm happy to find this page. I am a beginner. I bought material for a quilt and I made a mistake in cutting strips, so now I have to rip out sewing between squares and resew. My question is, how do I keep the 1/4 inch? Or in general, how do you keep an accurate seam allowance no matter what width it is?
So tips for keeping an accurate seam allowance. So I don't know if my mind is going in the same direction as Deanne's question, but in keeping an accurate seam allowance, I know some people have used the tip of putting like a piece of tape on their machine bed at the seam allowance width that they most often use. My FOF Passport 2.0 has like a little ruler on the machine bed, so it's super helpful for me to just line up my fabric with the mark and just let the machine eat it, let the machine take it. And I know that as long as I keep my fabric at this a certain mark, that when it goes under the foot, it's going to have the correct seam allowance. So if your machine does not have those handy little pre-made measuring marks on the machine bed, you can make your own by putting a piece of tape at your desired seam allowance. Or you can put a piece of tape the other way. Instead of going straight across the bed like this, you can go this way. And so you can mark yourself multiple seam allowances. Just make sure you're measuring from the needle center point out, and you can mark 1/4, 1/2, 5/8, whatever you want along that little piece of tape, and make sure your raw edge is aligned with that. And keep it forward of the needle as well, because once your fabric gets to the needle, it's too late to change that seam allowance. And that's, so you want to have it forward of the needle and watch that place, that mark, and your raw edge aligning with that mark forward of the needle, so that if it moves at all, you will have time then to correct before it gets to the needle.
Yeah, absolutely. And you even just did a video where you shared several of your top tips and tricks, and marking seam allowances was in that one too. So I'm not sure if that one is up on the site yet, but it will be available soon, so you can get a better visual on how she marks that as well. All right, Carrie asks, do you have suggestions on where to learn about the various types of fabrics, their properties, and what they are best used for? For example, the difference between types of cotton, the difference between 2-way and 4-way stretch, the various man-made fabrics.
That's an excellent question, Carrie. And there is not, I have not found one good single resource on a whole bunch of different fabrics. It's more like if I have a question on a certain fabric, I will just type it into my search bar and kind of search out answers. There are some blogs that seem to keep coming up in those types of searches that I do. So it was Liesl Gibson's blog. Her company's name escapes me now, but Liesl Gibson, Oliver and S, they have patterns and a great blog. I was just reading a blog post of theirs the other day because I was looking up something about knits. So yeah, for me, it's usually a case-by-case basis of the specific fabric that I have a question on, and that'll take me to different places on the internet. But it's a good idea to have a class or a video on that. Actually, maybe that's going to go on the list as well. A nice overview class on different types of fabrics and best uses for them, because it can seem very confusing because there are all kinds of different names for fabrics, and sometimes it is referencing the fiber content, sometimes it's referencing the weave, sometimes it's referencing the process used to dye it, as in batik. So it can be kind of overwhelming to hear all of these different names and not know what they mean, but usually just if you type in a couple of good keywords into your search bar, you'll be able to find some answers. It might take a little bit of research, a little bit of digging, but yeah, maybe we can put together a video on a
Yeah.
good place for people to go to get
That
answers
is
on.
true. Yeah. And I was trying to just search real quick Liesl Gibson and I just was finding Liesl and Co. and Oliver and S. I don't know if she has a different one, but that's what I was trying to look up real quick. But then, yeah, but I think a lot of times when people are struggling to find one, um, go-to main resource for everything is that not a lot of people are into everything. You're either, some people are into quilting cotton fabric, some people are into knit, some people are into specialty fabrics. So I think it's absolutely wonderful that you're interested in every single type of fabric out there, and that would be a great thing to kind of compile and put together. And maybe we'll just have to put that on the list for in the future for sure. So I think that's awesome. All right, Dawn says that she has been sewing for over 50 years and have worn out several inexpensive machines, but she's now loving the higher end machines now. They make sewing pleasurable and make me feel luxurious. I
That's
love it. I
awesome.
agree. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is something that you'll find too with the more expensive machines is that they're just made with a little bit higher quality materials too. They feel a little bit heavier duty. You can tell when you
Yeah.
pick them up, and that
Mhm.
does mean that they will last longer. It's a little more of an investment, but they will last longer.
Yes, absolutely. All right, Ronnie asks, I've noticed that there are different weights of serger thread. Some are thicker than others. Can regular sewing thread be used on a serger if purchased in larger spools?
Don't quote me on this because, as I mentioned, I don't use my serger very often, but
Mhm.
I would say yes. Um, as as long as you use this maybe the same weight of thread in all the cones, but I
Mhm.
don't even know if that is a requirement. But just like sewing thread comes in different weights, and you can use a really thin, fine thread for your sewing machine. You can use up to a heavyweight and top stitch threads, which are thicker and heavier. You can use all of those on your machine as
Mhm.
long as you make sure you're doing everything right with balancing it with the bobbin thread and the fabric and the right type of needle, etc. I would imagine that the same is true for a serger.
Yeah, I would think so too. Our next one, Linda wants to know if there is somewhere that she would be able to get her sewing machine looked at and tuned up, so to speak. It needs a good overhaul. So where would you take yours?
That's a good question. I have never taken a sewing machine in because I've never had, like a problem that I couldn't fix myself, I guess.
Hmm.
I can clean it myself. My machine doesn't need oiling. I've never had a problem with like the timing being off. But I know sometimes when a machine, if you've got an issue that you can't fix and you don't want to or not qualified to like open up the entire machine and see what's going on in the guts of it, which would scare me as well. Um, you would want to take it in. And there are, I think if you did a search, I usually use Google Maps for searches like this so I can see things that are near to me. But there are places like sewing machine repair places, a lot of dealerships or places that sell sewing machines may
Hmm.
also do repairs. And if they don't, they might know where or know a good person who would do repairs.
Yeah.
So yeah, that might all be area specific, but those are just some good places to start researching that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like the machine I have now, because it is so computerized and I'm going to say very specific in terms of if I had something go wrong with it, it's a Husqvarna Viking. I would definitely want to take it to a
Yeah.
dealer for that. I did, however, years and years ago, I was using my grandmother's old Singer sewing machine, and I did throw the timing off on that one, hitting a needle, doing what you're not supposed to, or hitting a pin. I mean, and obviously that's something that I cannot fix. That's
Right.
just like you can't even, and it makes it to where you cannot sew. But because it was a basic, um, more mechanical, less computerized machine, I just took it to a local. It was actually a like sewing machine slash vacuum repair
Yeah.
place, and they did a wonderful job, fixed it. So yeah, I think it depends on your level of complexity of machine too, as to where you should maybe look at taking it as well.
Yeah.
So, all right, Ronnie asks, when using fusible Pellon, my needle gets sticky. How do I prevent or clean this? Would rubbing alcohol work for this as well?
Um, I think I think so. Rubbing alcohol would work. Fusible interfacings, though, shouldn't gum up your needle all that badly because this is, um, what they're made for. They're made for having that adhesive on a large area of something and made to be sewn through a lot. Um, so again, as with the Velcro I was talking about, if it has been stored for a long time, like if your fusible Pellon has been, if it's getting older, sometimes that adhesive might be kind of breaking down to the point where it's not staying stuck on the fabric and is releasing onto your needle. So I would say just be sure you're storing your fusible things um, in a not in a humid place and out of direct sunlight so that there's no damage done to it. And make sure just maybe try buying a little bit new, like right from the store, and see if that helps. I don't know, make sure you're following the instructions on the length of time you're supposed to, fuse it, the heat you're supposed to fuse it on, to make sure that that glue, that adhesive on the backside of the fusible is sticking onto the fabric and won't release onto your needle. But if, for whatever reason, it's just, you keep getting that issue that it keeps getting stuck to your needle. Instead, the rubbing alcohol trick, while annoying, is it works. It makes it functional. So that's something to always have in your back pocket.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Susan asks, I'm sewing 100% polyester satin to a cotton lining. The settings are auto for stitch and 4 for pressure, for pressure foot pressure. The satin stitch looks fine for cotton. The satin looks fine, but the cotton is wobbly. Any suggestions?
Let's see. Sewing polyester satin to cotton. So it looks fine on the satin side, but on the cotton side, it's wobbly. So wobbly, like the thread is maybe not lying flat and tight to the fabric, is what I'm kind of interpreting that as. And that sounds like a tension issue. So depending on what side is up and what side is down, that depends on, or that will inform what to do with the tension. So if the cotton side is down and the thread is looking wobbly, that would be, I would say you would want to increase your needle tension. So if the thread is loose on the bottom side, that means your needle tension is not pulling up enough on that bobbin thread to make it lie nice and tight and flat against the fabric. That's my best assessment of that. So yeah, I might try messing with the tension a little bit and test in small increments. If you're going to be testing the tension, move half step and test, and half step and test. And then if I misinterpreted that really bad, you might have to go back the other way and test.
Yeah, I was in my mind, I was picturing wobbly as in like, and sometimes when you stitch on satin, if you're not using a sharp enough needle, or that can make it look weird. But then if the satin is fine and the cotton is not, that's probably something similar. Okay. All right. Deanna asks, what are the basics to know when using a pattern? Any tips to keep in mind?
So when using a commercial pattern, yes, I'll go down my list of tips. Okay. So when cutting out your commercial pattern, you want to make sure you cut out on the outer edge of the black line, because even though the black line isn't super thick, if you cut on the inside of the black line, that's still a little bit on all sides of the pattern that you're shearing off. So cut on the outside, of the black line. When you are fixing your pattern to your fabric to cut out your fabric, make sure that all of the fabric is on your table. Make sure it's not like falling off your table because it'll pull and stretch. It's more of a cutting tip, but I like to use pattern weights to keep my pattern on my fabric, but a lot of people use pins. I used to use pins all the time before I got pattern weights. But make sure that your pattern is adhered enough to your fabric that you're not getting shifting as you're cutting. The commercial patterns will come with their little instruction insert with instructions for the pattern, and it'll come with a little key to tell you what all of those symbols mean, because there's going to be like dots and notches and dotted lines, and it looks like a topographical map or something weird, but they have all of the information that you need is going to be on that paper that comes with the pattern. And you may need to transfer some of those markings onto your fabric, and you can do that with chalk paper and a tracing wheel, or if you don't have that or don't want to mess with that, you can just use a hand sewing needle and some thread to do either tailor's tacks or thread tracing, which is a great way to mark things. You can mark dart lines with it, and you just kind of stitch through the pattern and the fabric, leaving lots of thread in between your loops, and then you clip those in between the fabric layers, and then you leave some thread in each fabric layer to mark your darts or whatever it is. So make sure you're transferring all the marks that you need. And I would just say, make sure you read through all of the instructions before you start.
Yeah.
Know where you're going, know what step, all the steps that need to happen, because things have an order, and there are some things that you can't do before you do other things. So make sure you read through everything so you really understand what you're doing before you get started. But really, all commercial patterns will have all those instructions for you, and the different companies are different in what they include, or maybe the marks that they use, but they should have all that information in there. And I love that there are all of these smaller pattern companies coming up, because their instructions seem to be a little bit better, maybe, in my experience. So I like the smaller companies rather than the big, like Butterick and Vogue and Simplicity, but they also have an excellent catalog. The big companies have an excellent catalog of all kinds of different patterns. So there are pros and cons to, all the different companies, but yeah. They should have all the information you need in there, and save the tissue paper that you cut off of your commercial patterns, because it can be used for other things.
I think we're gonna just have to do this for the site as well. Just like Nikki's 101 uses for tissue paper. If you haven't watched a live event with us before and know what she uses tissue paper for, it's a lot of things. So we'll have to put that together too. But back to the patterns real quick, because this goes into a last question here from Carmen was asking about vintage patterns. A lot of those same tips apply, but that's a great thing about a lot of, whether it's the newer pattern companies that are coming out, the pattern companies that have been around forever, vintage patterns, a lot of those markings are universal, and a lot of the same tips that you just mentioned for one pattern is going to work for another pattern as well. So that's perfect.
That's right. And the one thing I will say about vintage patterns is they should have measurements on the back of the pattern as to what sizes, but you can't really trust a size line. You can't say, I wear size 10 clothing, so I'm going to cut out a size 10 pattern. It does not really translate. So you consult the measurements on the back of the pattern envelope, or if you've lost the pattern envelope, you can measure the actual pattern to make sure that it's going to be the right size for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, perfect. Well, I want to thank you for being here to answer everyone's sewing questions. And if you missed the very beginning of this, we were talking about a free download, and that is 7 tips for organizing your sewing space. So you can download that if you are somebody who is, wanting to organize using some of the tips that Nicki talked about earlier, or maybe thinking about some spring cleaning coming up. That's a great resource to have. So definitely download that, check that out. Check out some of the videos that we referenced again on National Sewing Circle, and then join us back here next month. And Nicki will be answering more of your sewing questions.